How do we discover what we are passionate about, and how do we weave those things into our lives? Uncovering Passion is a film series that digs into these questions and many more by glimpsing into the lives of people who are trying to navigate by their inner compasses and build joyful, authentic lives.
So it all began really just with me spending all of my free time as a kid outside. I lived just north of where we are now in Richmond, and in our backyard we had the Chickahominy wetlands, and so there was just this big swamp basically, and I spent all of my free time back there building forts and having mud wars and playing paintball and just exploring the swamp in general. Elementary school was fine. I think there was less constriction in elementary school, it's kind of more exploring what interests you, and there's drawing and all those kinds of things. And then you get to middle school and it feels like there's this sort of chopping block mentality, and SOLs, which is standards of learning tests, came out. And so in 7th grade, I started failing a lot of my courses, not because I didn't understand them or I couldn't complete the coursework or get good grades, but because I hated it. And so in 8th grade, my mom and dad pulled me out of public school, and I spent a year doing essentially whatever I wanted. My mom kind of had this idea that she could unschool us, as she called it. So she was really the pioneer of that, and I owe her so much for making that decision and having the courage to do it in the face of tremendous opposition. I spent that entire year doing exactly what I always wanted to do as a kid, which was building tree forts and blowing up microwaves and doing all this. And the problem is, like anything, the novelty eventually wears off. And I started kind of wanting to learn again and wanted to learn in some sort of setting, but I knew public school wasn't right. So I started college when I was 16 at Virginia Commonwealth University here in Richmond, Virginia, and then I was done by the time I was 19. 4 months later, I took off for Africa, and I spent 7 months traveling from Cape Town all the way up to Ethiopia. And I visited, I think in the process, like 13 or 14 countries. I had a camera with me and I was taking a lot of pictures. At the time, I didn't know that photography or filmmaking was what I wanted to do, but it was certainly becoming a more important part of my trips. Right after that, I went to South America and again spent 6 or 7 months down there traveling all throughout South America and seeing all these different places. And it was sort of like that experience in middle school where I spent a year doing whatever I wanted. The novelty of just traveling to travel wore off. I started thinking about how can I make a life out of photography and out of filmmaking, a life out of sharing stories from some of these places. Today, that's predominantly what I do, is tell stories about wild places and the creatures that live inside them. And that's because I see their importance to humanity, to the earth, and also because that's where I'm happiest and calmest, and I feel the most alive. In 2008, when I was 23 years old, I got a Young Explorer grant from National Geographic to go to the Congo and also to Gabon and photograph and map caves in the rainforest. And that is what changed my life. That is what brought me to where I am now, making a life out of photography. All I wanted to do for years, and still, is work with crocodiles. I have crocodile skulls in my house. I have crocodile teeth. I have probably 100 books on crocodiles. They just totally, rule my mind at times. We're trying to figure out a number of different solutions to film her coming back to the nest and taking care of it and maintaining it, and then hopefully in a few days' time, the hatching. I'm trying to tell an important story, and there is something important, I think, to tell about crocodiles and how things have worked in Australia, and I think that telling that story can help preserve crocodile populations around the world. I think that any career as a professional photographer or professional filmmaker has to begin with that. It has to begin with something that you care more about almost than life itself. I think the power of photography in particular is that you produce photos that can be printed and you can have a physical copy of it. I come down these stairs and I see these pictures, or I have a couple other pictures printed in my office, and that is the validation. Seeing my pictures from a story that hasn't made it into the pages of any magazine are what remind me of these great times that I've had. And that, isn't that what life is ultimately about? Experiences.